Stop acting obsolete, Cindy. It's just paperwork with water in a pipe. Derek Voss pitched the line from the center aisle of Bay 3 so every fitter, rigger, and forklift driver could hear it over the compressor rumble, and the words hit harder than the noise. 12 days later, a customer skid would split open at 6,000 psi and throw steel across a commissioning deck. But in that moment, the only thing that moved was attention. Faces turned. Ratchets paused mid-stroke. A tagline slipped from one gloved hand and slapped the concrete. Derek played to the room. From where Cindy stood, public humiliation was a pattern in how he pushed production. If he could make a senior technician look small in front of a crew, everyone else moved faster out of fear. Cindy Chambers did not flinch, but shock still traveled through her in a clean, cold line. 14 years in valve pack assembly had taught her exactly where pressure systems lied and exactly how management language dressed up risk as efficiency. She had seen cracked roots called cosmetic. She had seen dead transmitters called temporary. She had seen missing torque witness marks called a documentation gap. She made a high salary for one reason that mattered. She knew which shortcuts ended in sirens, lawsuits, and folded hard hats on a break room table. Derek called that expensive. She called it arithmetic. The skid sat on stands beneath sodium white lights, 40 feet of coated piping, manifold cluster, instrument rack, and closure heads wrapped in fresh insulation. New paint, fresh stencil, customer logo already masked on. It looked finished to anyone who judged by color and crate date. Cindy judged by barriers and records. She had spent the previous 2 hours with dye penetrant at the manifold root pass and found a crescent indication at the weld toe, narrow but continuous. She had counted 6 studs on the discharge closure without torque paint continuity. She had run a chart recorder verification and watched channel 3 stay flat when it should have traced pressure rise. Then she had opened the quality traveler and found the hydro hold point blank. No signature, no witness stamp, no release authority. The interlock indicator on the panel stayed red. Derek stepped closer. Bright office clean helmet and polished boots collecting shop dust he looked offended to touch. "We are not missing this vessel window because you want a ceremony," he said. "Logistics has booking. Finance approved ship date. Customer needs this on deck next week." "It is not a ceremony," Cindy said. Her voice stayed level, which made his louder by comparison. "It is a hydrostatic proof test. Rated working pressure is 6,000 pounds per square inch. Code requires proof above operating load. Water is used because it is incompressible. Low stored energy. If a defect opens, you get a leak and a lesson, not a blast wave and an ambulance convoy." One of the welders near the manifold lowered his hood and watched without pretending not to. A junior assembler who had just started that quarter stared at the floor as if bolt bins had become fascinating. Cindy could feel the crew dividing along an old fault line every industrial floor knows. The people who answer to physics and the people who answer to bonus decks. Derek threw out a short laugh that contained no humor. "There you go. Classroom speech. We build skids, Cindy, not dissertations." He pointed at the traveler clipped to her board. "Sign the hold point release, clear the red light, and move this unit to final banding." She looked at the red interlock indicator. Then she looked at Derek. Then she looked at the blank signature line under Hydro Witness Complete, Revision Block 7C. The rhythm grounded her. Object, authority, evidence. She spoke the sentence the crew had heard from her in other tight shifts and ugly deadlines. No hydro, no ship. Derek's jaw tightened and he raised his voice a second notch so it carried down both aisles. Coward, lazy, and expensive. That's what this is. He scanned the bay as he said it, making sure the insult had witnesses. You hide behind procedures because you can't adapt. This is why people call old-school techs obsolete. The word obsolete landed as intended. Not because she feared it was true, but because it was designed to strip away her authority in front of the people she was supposed to protect. Cindy felt heat rise behind her ears. She kept her hands still at her sides because she knew any visible anger would be filed as attitude. Her discipline had never been about being agreeable, it had always been about being exact. She lifted the traveler and opened it to the defect log she had started at 6:42. Dye penetrant indication at manifold root pass. Station M17. 6 studs with missing torque witness marks. Closure C2. Recorder channel 3 failed response test at 7:11. No valid trace capture. Hydro hold point unsigned. These are not opinions. Derek leaned in, invading space by inches. These are delays. I need shipment released by 1800. You need a test record that can survive discovery, Cindy said. Because once this leaves our gate, first pressure event is at customer site. If that crack propagates under load, you're not saving time, you're exporting hazard. He tapped the paper with one finger, each tap sharp and theatrical. Direct order, release it. Cannot release with a red interlock and open hold point. Then clear the interlock. Interlock clears after valid sequence, not before. Around them, work resumed in hesitant fragments, the sound of impact guns and chain hoists returning in uneven bursts. No one wanted stillness on a production floor. Stillness meant management conflict, and management conflict meant collateral damage in schedules and write-ups. By 7:20 that morning, 2 supervisors from adjacent bays had drifted into sight under the pretense of checking inventory counts. Derek noticed. His posture sharpened. The confrontation had an audience now, and Cindy had yet to see Derek back down in front of one. He angled his body so he was half facing the crew and half facing Cindy, as if delivering both instruction and warning. You are not the only technician in this plant. If you can't keep pace, I will find someone who can. Cindy heard the threat clearly. She also heard the loading dock alarm in the distance and pictured the crate staging plan pinned in logistics. Steel base, weather wrap, cap inventory, export seals, truck departure. The machine around her had momentum, and momentum in industry could crush judgment quietly without shouting. She kept to mechanism. Assign whoever you want. The criteria do not change. Hydro must be witnessed. Trace must be valid. Defect must be dispositioned by engineering. Engineering signed general release yesterday. General release is not hold point closeout. Derek gave a thin smile, the kind that announced escalation rather than agreement. We'll handle the paperwork. You handle your lane. My lane is pressure integrity. Your lane is becoming a problem. For a second, she saw several things at once: the crescent indication under fluorescent light, the dead recorder channel, the missing torque paint, Derek's fixation on the ship date, and the way newer workers watched him to learn what counted as leadership here. The non-trivial risk in front of her had a technical side and a cultural side. One crack in steel, one crack in standards. Both propagated under load. She reached for her radio, then chose her phone instead. written record over verbal memory. She opened a fresh email draft addressed to engineering distribution, compliance mailbox, and quality administration, and she typed while standing in front of him. Subject line: Hold point refusal, Skid 2 4-117A. She logged time, defects, interlock status, and direct order to release without completed hydro. She attached photos: penetrant indication with scale, closure studs without witness paint, panel screen with channel 3 dead. Then she hit send. Derek watched the screen flash confirmation and exhaled through his nose. So that's where we are. That is where we are, Cindy said. He took one step back and lifted his clipboard. Fine, stay with your paperwork. I'm reassigning sign-off. She felt the shock settle into something harder, less volatile, and more durable. Not calm, exactly. Resolve under strain. Reassignment doesn't erase the record. We'll see what record matters at review, he said, and turned toward the supervisor station. As he walked off, he called over his shoulder, still loud enough for half the bay to catch each word. Either this skid releases by 1800 or clear your locker. No one answered him. The compressors throbbed. A chain block clicked overhead. Cindy stood beside the red interlock light and watched Derek confer with quality admin at the terminal desk, pointing at the traveler, at the clock, at the shipping board. She knew what came next because she had seen this management pattern before. Close first, justify later, relabel the breach as process flexibility, and count on distance to hide consequence. She also knew distance had collapsed in modern contracts. Serial traceability, calibration records, pressure charts, witness signatures. Those trails did not disappear just because a crate left a dock. She keyed her radio to maintenance controls and requested a service check ticket on the chart recorder channel, so the fault existed in another system with another timestamp. Then she logged the interlock state in her notebook, date and minute, in block letters. She did not raise her voice. She did not chase Derek down the aisle. She stayed where responsibility lived, beside the panel that refused to lie. Across Bay 3, the day accelerated around her. Forklifts moving dunnage, riggers staging slings, admin printing export labels. Schedule pressure had its own weather, and it was rolling in. Cindy read her sent email receipts once, saved local copies to archive, and clipped the traveler back to the board with the unsigned hold point facing out like a warning sign everyone could pretend not to read. Physics, she knew, was patient. It accepted no insult, signed no bonus plan, and eventually collected every unpaid debt. Cindy kept her eyes on the panel until Derek disappeared behind stacked crate frames. Then she turned back to the skid and started treating it like a failure investigation instead of a production job. The bay noise stayed constant. Air tools, fork horns, chain drag. But her attention narrowed to a sequence she had run hundreds of times. Verify indication, verify instrument, verify boundary condition. If one layer failed, the next layer had to catch it. That was how pressure work stayed boring. And boring was the safest day a plant could have. She unclipped the insulation seam around the discharge manifold and folded it back in a clean arc. The wrapped section still held warmth from the morning fit-up. An adhesive dust stuck to her gloves. Under the sodium white overheads, the weld toe looked ordinary for half a second. Then she sprayed fresh penetrant, waited, and drew developer across the root area with a deliberate, even pass. A thin crescent bled through again, sharper than the first red, a curved line no wider than pencil lead. She set a scale beside it, took 2 photos, and spoke into her voice memo without lifting her eyes. Station M17. Reconfirm at 7:26. Linear indication persists. Estimated visible length 14 millimeters, likely longer subsurface. A fitter named Noel paused, with a ratchet at the adjacent support leg, and leaned in just enough to see, not enough to get accused of stopping work. Could be surface stain, he said quietly, almost hopeful. If it were stain, it would feather, Cindy said. She tapped the curved line with the back of a marker cap. This is tight and continuous. Crack behavior at toe, likely tied to start-stop heat input on root pass. Noel nodded once, face flattening into that look tradespeople got when optimism lost to evidence. He went back to his bolts without another word. Cindy moved to the closure flange and knelt beside stud positions C2-3 through C2-8. The torque witness paint should have drawn clean lines from nut to flange face. One glance confirmation that each stud had reached and held target torque. 6 marks were either missing entirely or broken. Paint stripe on one side only. She checked breakaway with a digital torque wrench at the lowest allowed verification threshold. 2 nuts moved before the wrench chirped. Not much, but enough. At 6,000 psi, not much, could become a launch event. She captured each stud head with date time stamp and frame, then wrote in her notebook, block letters and no abbreviations. Under torque suspect C2-3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Requires retorque sequence plus witness. She felt that familiar pressure behind her ribs, not panic, more like compressed focus. Defect chains rarely arrived one at a time. They came in clusters, and clusters meant process decay, not bad luck. By 7:32, Bay 3 had shifted into shipping rhythm. Dunnage stacks appeared beside the skid. A logistics coordinator rolled over a pallet of export caps and transit braces. At the supervisor terminal, Derek stood shoulder to shoulder with quality admin, speaking low now, pointing at screens instead of people. Cindy didn't need to hear him to understand the trajectory. Paper first, reality later. She opened the recorder cabinet and inspected channel cards. Channel 1 and 2 LEDs held steady green. Channel 3 flickered once, then went dark. She connected a portable loop calibrator, injected a known 12 milliampere signal, and watched the digital local display rise as expected on the pressure transmitter simulator. On the chart recorder interface, channel 3 stayed flat at baseline. No line, no trend, no evidence. A hydro without a valid trace was not a hydro. It was theater with a pump. Luis from maintenance controls arrived with a tablet and a half-zipped tool pouch. "Got your ticket," he said. "Recorder channel fault?" "Not fault. Dead acquisition path," Cindy answered. She handed him the loop lead so he could see the live signal. "Transmitter simulation is good. Recorder input isn't writing." Luis watched the screen for 10 seconds, then exhaled. "Input card could be burned. We can swap, but not in 10 minutes. "Do it anyway," she said. "I need independent maintenance timestamp." He gave a short nod. "I'll log as instrument unavailable for proof test." "Use that exact phrase." He looked up at her, understood why wording mattered, and typed it verbatim before starting the card pull. A junior tech approached from final assembly, helmet too clean. New radio clipped high on his chest like he still hadn't found where gear sat comfortably. Cindy recognized him. Evan Pike. 18 months in plant service, competent with prep work, never run full witness protocol alone. He held the traveler gingerly, as if paper could burn him. Derek said I'm taking sign-off lane, Evan said. He kept his voice low. He wants release packet staged now. Can you just tell me what boxes he cares about so I don't miss formatting? Cindy stood and wiped developer residue from her glove with a rag. Not formatting. Mechanism. You can't sign Hydro complete with channel 3 dead, open crack indication, and untorqued studs. He shifted his weight. He said Hydro was already effectively verified through pneumatic pre-check. She stared at him for one beat, then answered in a tone she used when training apprentices near live systems. Pneumatic leak check is not hydro-proof. Air is compressible, water is not. Compressible medium stores energy. In failure, that energy discharges fast. Hydro exists to keep stored energy low while you validate boundary integrity. Different test, different risk profile, different acceptance criteria. Evan swallowed and looked down at the blank witness line. If I refuse, he'll bounce me to yard inventory. If you sign false, investigators will use your name in a report. She didn't soften it. He needed the real trade-off, not comfort. Jobs recover. Falsified pressure records follow you. He nodded faintly, unsure whether agreement or fear had moved him, and stepped away when Derek turned from the terminal and scanned the aisle. Cindy returned to the manifold and ran a phased array ultrasonic probe along the weld seam, coupling gel cold against steel. The A-scan displayed noisy but interpretable returns. One sector showed a discontinuity extending beneath the toe line. Depth, deeper than dye alone could prove. She saved the scan file with unit ID and station tag, then mirrored it to her secure folder on the plant server and an encrypted local drive. Physical evidence had to survive system edits, access revocations, and convenient data losses. She had learned that lesson years ago when a near-miss report accidentally disappeared between shift change and management review. A forklift rolled past carrying transit frames, one nylon sling trailing from a tine. The sling edge had visible abrasion and 3 cut fibers near the eye splice. Cindy stepped into the lane and raised a hand. The driver braked hard enough that the load rocked once. "Hold," she said. The driver, Marnie, leaned out of the cage. "What now?" Cindy pointed at the sling. "That eye is compromised. Pull it from service." Marnie squinted, then saw the fray and grimaced. "I grabbed from the blue rack." Blue rack should be in-date inspection only. Not today, apparently. Cindy tagged the sling out of service with red tape and signed the tag ID. It wasn't the main hazard, but it was the same pattern in miniature. Warning signals ignored because movement mattered more than margins. When systems degraded, defects stopped being exceptions and became ambient conditions. At 7:44, she keyed her radio to quality admin. Request traveler custody for discrepancy attachment. A pause, then the admin clerk, Priya, answered, careful and formal. Traveler is in active close-out workflow per operations direction. Copy, then log verbal notice. Additional NDE confirms weld discontinuity depth beyond surface indication. Recorder channel 3 failed simulated input test. Torque discrepancies reconfirmed on 6 closure studs. I am submitting DR revision in 5 minutes. Priya hesitated a fraction too long. Logged. Cindy heard in that hesitation the institutional tension she knew too well. Priya wasn't the decision maker. She was the conduit between facts and a hierarchy that often treated facts as negotiable. Cindy didn't blame her. She just made sure the timestamp existed. She opened a second discrepancy report and attached everything in one packet. Penetrant photos, ultrasonic capture, torque verification notes, recorder test video with live milliampere display, and dead trace channel. Maintenance ticket number from Luis. She added one line in plain language above the technical block. Release under current conditions creates first pressure event risk at customer site. Then she routed it to engineering, compliance, EHS, and her personal legal archive address. Luis reappeared holding the pulled channel card in an anti-static sleeve. A char mark dotted one corner near the terminal strip. "Card's cooked," he said. "No spare in cage. Earliest replacement, if stores has one, is this afternoon. Put photo in your ticket." "Already did." "And include no valid hydro trace possible." He gave her a tired half smile. "You really think they'll stop shipment?" "I think records outlive meetings," she said. He nodded once, then headed back toward controls. The overhead speakers crackled with a logistics call for dock prep on outbound Unit 24-117A. Two riggers started setting transit braces around the skid feet. Cindy stepped to the test panel and checked the interlock chain diagnostics. Interlock loop fault remained active at recorder input verification node. The red indicator held steady. Someone had tried the bypass key switch recently. The tamper seal, which should have been intact, showed a split edge and new crease at the lock plate. She photographed that too, close enough to capture seal number fragment and break pattern. She felt a pulse of anger then, brief and bright, because tamper marks meant intent. Not confusion, not rushed oversight, intent. She let the feeling pass and translated it into process. Photo, timestamp, chain of custody note. Emotional certainty never won hearings. Documentation did. Evan drifted back to her station, voice barely above the compressor hum. "He told me to pre-fill witness line and leave time blank so he can align with release." Cindy turned to face him squarely. "Did you sign?" "No." "Good. Keep it that way." "He said you're trying to tank quarter end." She looked past Evan to the manifold, the open insulation flap, the crescent line still faintly visible under developer dust. "Quarter end can survive delay. People don't always survive pressure failures." He followed her gaze and said nothing. A vibration passed through the floor as another forklift crossed the expansion joint near Bay 2, and for a second the manifold trembled in its stands. Cindy watched the cracked tow line catch light and vanish again, depending on angle. That was the cruel thing about technical alarms. They looked small until load, heat, and time amplified them into events nobody could control. She thought about customer deck crews who had never heard Derek's speech, people who would trust the test package because contracts required trust at a distance. At 7:58, her phone buzzed with the first response of the morning from compliance. One sentence only. "Received. Under review." It wasn't action, but it was traceable acknowledgement. She screenshotted it, saved it to the case folder, and sent a mirror copy to her archive. Around her, Bay 3 kept accelerating toward shipment. Ratchets snapped, banding carts rolled, printers spit labels. Derek stood near the shipping board now, chin raised, speaking with that sharp confidence managers used when outcomes still looked controllable. Cindy stayed beside the panel, one hand on the notebook spine, and reran the interlock diagnostics one more time in full sequence just to remove any argument about operator error. The results did not move. Recorder verification node failed. Hydrogate blocked. Release conditions unmet. She wrote the final line for that hour with deliberate pressure on the pen. Technical alarm status unchanged. Multiple independent failures present. Do not pressurize. Then she closed the notebook, set it flat on the test cart, and listened to the bay as if it were a machine about to cross from noise into warning. The red light stayed red. The red light stayed red, and Cindy heard Derek's boots before she saw him. Hard heel strikes, cutting through the tool noise as he came back down the aisle with Priya on one side and Evan half a step behind. Derek stopped at the test cart, looked at the interlock panel, looked at her notebook, then looked at her like she was an obstruction he could invoice. "You've made your point," he said. "Now clear the gate and release the skid." Cindy kept one hand on the edge of the panel and did not move away from it. "Gate won't clear because sequence criteria are not met." "That's not what I asked." "That's still the answer." His mouth tightened. "I'm done with this performance. We are shipping at 1800. You are signing hydro completion and closing the hold point." She turned the screen toward him and pointed to the diagnostics path with a gloved finger. "Recorder verification node failed. Channel 3 is dead. We cannot generate a valid pressure trace. We have channels 1 and 2. Not for this procedure. Channel 3 is the required independent capture for witness record." She tapped the traveler where the acceptance block was blank. "Code compliance depends on the full trace, not a partial trend and a promise." Derek leaned in, voice low but sharp. "You are turning paperwork into a shutdown." "No," she said. "You are calling evidence paperwork because the evidence is inconvenient." Priya's eyes flicked between them and dropped to her tablet. Evan stood rigid with the traveler in both hands, as if holding still might keep him invisible. Around them the bay kept moving in fragments, chain hoist links rattling, forklifts backing on alarms, an impact gun pulsing in short bursts from Bay 4. Work never stopped for one argument. It flowed around it. And that was what made these moments dangerous. The system looked normal right up until it wasn't. Derek changed tactics and spread his hands. Managerial calm painted on. "Walk me through it one last time, Cindy. Why is this unit unsafe to release? In plain language right now." She recognized the maneuver. He wanted an audience-ready answer he could later frame as overreaction. She gave him the mechanism anyway, exact and public. "Because we have a confirmed discontinuity at manifold root pass M17, likely deeper than surface based on ultrasonic return. Because 6 closure studs show missing or broken witness paint, and 2 moved under minimum verification torque. Because recorder channel 3 cannot log pressure rise, so any hydro run would be undocumented and invalid, because the interlock chain detected that fault and blocked test authorization. Those are independent failures. Combined, they create a credible boundary failure scenario at pressure." Derek shook his head with a small laugh. "Credible scenario, you hear yourself? We are not launching rockets." She held his gaze. "Pressure vessel logic does not care what industry slogan you use. At 6,000 psi, a crack propagates fast. Under-torqued closure loses preload. If boundary opens under compressible medium at site commissioning, release energy spikes. People get hit before anyone reaches an e-stop." He snapped louder now. "It is just water in a pipe." "Hydro is water by design," she said. "Incompressible medium limits stored energy. That is why hydro exists. Skip it here, and first true pressure event happens in the customer yard, with gas in the line and full operational variables. You move the risk from our controlled bay to their crew. A welder at the adjacent stand muted his grinder and pretended to check his cable. 2 riggers slowed near the dunnage rack. Derek noticed the attention and stepped closer, invading her space again, his voice dropping to a hard whisper. You will not lecture me in front of my floor. Then stop asking me to certify something false in front of your floor. For a beat, he said nothing. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and somewhere down the row, a pallet band snapped with a sharp metallic crack that made 3 heads turn. Cindy felt her pulse up in her throat but kept her tone flat. Defiance for her was never volume. It was staying attached to the sequence when hierarchy tried to cut steps out of it. Derek pointed at the interlock key switch. Clear the loop manually. She didn't look away from him. Tamper seal is already damaged. I documented it. Seal damage could be from handling. Then there should be a recorded maintenance break and replacement number. There isn't. He shifted to Priya. Log that operator refuses direct instruction. Cindy answered before Priya could type. Log full instruction. Direct request to bypass active safety, interlock with unresolved instrument fault, and open hold point. Priya hesitated, then entered something on her tablet without speaking. Derek's jaw flexed. You don't get to dictate records. I don't dictate. I preserve. By 8:06, the light through the high bay windows had sharpened from gray to hard white, and the top rails of the skid threw bright edges across the concrete. Cindy felt the shop heating into late morning tempo, that familiar rise in noise and urgency that always made shortcuts look efficient to people who did not operate the consequence end of a process. Derek lifted the traveler from Evan and slapped it against his palm. Listen carefully. Engineering gave general release. Logistics has truck slot. Finance has vessel booking. This plant is not hostage to one technician's fear. She answered without blinking. General release is not hydro hold point closure. Booking windows do not alter crack growth. Finance does not rewrite pressure equations. His face went still in a way that meant anger had become strategy. Fine. Mechanism then. Suppose we run a limited hydro at reduced pressure and annotate missing channel as pending calibration. You get your test, I get shipment. No, Cindy said. Reduced pressure cannot prove design margin. Pending calibration cannot retroactively validate absent trace. Acceptance criteria are binary at this gate. Test complete with valid record or no release. He barked a short, humorless laugh. Binary, that's your problem. The real world has trade-offs. The real world has failure modes, she said. Trade-offs are for paint color and shipping route, not pressure boundary integrity. Evan shifted again, and the traveler edge rattled lightly against his gloves. Derek noticed and turned on him. You hearing this? This is what stagnation sounds like. Evan swallowed. I'm hearing procedure, sir. Derek pivoted back to Cindy, voice carrying down the aisle now. Last chance, sign the hold point and move. She looked at the red indicator, then at the blank witness line, then back at him. No hydro, no ship. The sentence landed like a dropped tool. Brief, final, impossible to interpret. Derek stared at her, nostrils flaring, then took one step back and raised his radio. Operations to HR. I need immediate floor attendance in Bay 3 for insubordination action. He released the button and looked at Cindy with open contempt. You just made this formal. She nodded once. Good. Formal records are harder to erase. He laughed at that, sharp and mean. You think this is a courtroom. It's a factory. It becomes a courtroom when someone gets hurt. He turned away from her and started issuing orders at speed, each one clipped in public. Riggers. Continue transit brace prep on 24-117A. Logistics. Keep dock lane open. Priya, close traveler to documentation pending status under Ops Authority Code. Evan, you are acting test sign-off tech effective now. He looked back at Cindy for the last line. And you are off this unit. Cindy did not move from the panel. I won't obstruct reassignment. I will not endorse release. Didn't ask. 2 minutes later, HR arrived in the form of Marisol Trent, Site Human Resources Lead, a hard hat over office clothes, expression already tired because she knew this script. She stepped into the triangle between Cindy and Derek and spoke in measured tones meant for conflict containment. I need concise statements from both sides. Derek went first. Senior tech refuses direct production instruction, obstructs shipment, creates hostile floor environment, and is unwilling to align with management decisions. Cindy answered when Marisol nodded to her. Senior pressure test technician refused to close hydro hold point with unresolved crack indication, under-torqued studs, failed recorder channel, and active interlock fault. Refusal based on code procedure and documented evidence. Marisol held out a hand. Do you have documentation here? Cindy passed over her notebook, then her phone with the discrepancy packet open and sent receipts visible. Time-stamped photos, maintenance ticket, NDE scan file references, and email distribution to engineering, compliance EHS. Derek exhaled loudly. And 10 pages of dramatic language. Cindy ignored him. Also note attempted instruction to bypass interlock without recorded maintenance authorization. Marisol read in silence for a moment, then looked to Priya. Is Traveler currently closed? Priya answered carefully. Inactive close-out workflow, not finalized. Cindy caught the phrasing and filed it mentally. Priya was protecting herself with verbs. Smart. Derek stepped in. Marisol, we are beyond debate. I'm issuing corrective action for refusal to perform assigned duty. Marisol kept her voice neutral. Corrective action can be issued. Technical disposition is not HR authority. Engineering and compliance must rule on release criteria. Derek smiled without warmth. Engineering already ruled. Cindy spoke before the momentum could set. General release only, no hydro witness closure. Marisol raised a hand for silence and turned to Cindy. Can you perform assigned duty if management confirms release pathway? Cindy answered at once. If release pathway includes completed hydro with valid trace, repaired or accepted weld by engineering disposition, and retorque with witness on all 6 studs, yes. Under current conditions, no. Marisol looked at Derek. That is a conditional refusal based on technical criteria. It is refusal, he said. It is documented. Derek's posture hardened, and when he spoke again, he made sure the bay could hear. Then document this. Effective immediately, Cindy Chambers is removed from Bay 3 operations pending disciplinary review. Badge access to test panel is suspended. She will clear personal locker by end of shift, unless she signs release compliance statement now. The line hit exactly where he wanted it to hit. In front of crew, in front of HR, in front of the junior tech he had just elevated. Cindy felt the sting anyway. Public demotion was a management weapon because it threatened more than pay. It threatened professional identity, the reputation that kept your name on call lists and your phone ringing when contracts got thin. She kept her breathing slow and asked one question. Do you want that instruction repeated for the record? Derek took a step toward her, finger pointed chest high. Record this clearly. Do your job or get off the site. Cindy met his stare. My job is preventing predictable pressure failures. I have done it. He turned to Evan and shoved the traveler into his hands. You, with me, we are finishing this. Evan looked from Derek to Cindy, face pale under fluorescent light. I don't have witness authority for solo hydro. You do now. I haven't run full protocol alone. You can read a checklist. Cindy spoke to Evan, not Derek. Checklist is not authority. If you sign what is true. Nothing else. Derek cut across her. No coaching, you're removed. Marisol stepped between them slightly. Cindy, for now, disengage from the unit while review proceeds. Cindy closed her notebook, handed Marisol a printed copy of the latest discrepancy report from the cart printer, and set her test panel key on top of it. I am disengaging under protest. Interlock remains active. Release criteria remain unmet. Derek gestured down the aisle. Locker. Now. She picked up her bag from beneath the cart, then paused long enough to face Marisol directly. Please log external notification recommendation. Customer-side hazard if pressurization occurs without validated hydro. Marisol gave a small, grim nod. I'll log the recommendation. Cindy stepped away from the panel and walked toward the locker corridor with every eye in Bay 3 on her back. Behind her, Derek's voice resumed, brisk and triumphant, assigning tasks, moving bodies, forcing motion back into the lane she had blocked. At the corner, she stopped once, turned, and saw Evan standing where she had stood, traveler open, pen uncapped. Red interlock still lit beside his shoulder like a warning beacon. Nobody in authority wanted to read. Evan standing where she had stood, traveler open, pen uncapped. Red interlock still lit beside his shoulder like a warning beacon. Nobody in authority wanted to read. Stayed in Cindy's sight for one more second as she turned the corner and walked toward the lockers. Marisol kept pace half a step behind, close enough to satisfy policy and far enough to avoid making it look like security escort theater. But both women could still hear Derek's voice, carrying over the bay noise. Fill line first. I want movement, not debate. Cindy stopped at her locker, spun the combination with steady fingers, and began pulling out what mattered. Her backup notebook, a spare drive, a folded copy of the pressure test procedure with her annotations in the margins. Her hands moved on routine, while her chest tightened around the sound of pumps, waking up behind the wall. Hydro carts had a recognizable startup sequence, a low electric hum, then a shudder as the positive displacement pump engaged. She listened for that sequence and heard it. Marisol glanced toward the bay door. He said you were removed from the unit, not from the building. Do you need 5 minutes for final documentation? I need 1 minute, Cindy said. She opened her phone, typed a new message to compliance and engineering, and copied EHS, removed from Bay 3 under protest at 8:11. Operations appears to be preparing pressure sequence with unresolved M17 discontinuity, 6 suspect studs, failed recorder channel, and active interlock fault. Immediate stop work intervention recommended. She attached the photo of the broken tamper seal and hit send, while the pump hum deepened. From beyond the cinder block wall came a clipped exchange through open radio channels, voices stepping on each other in the way bad decisions often sounded. Panel still red. Use bypass key. Key turned, still fault at recorder node. Run manual, We're not waiting on a card. Cindy closed her locker and looked at Marisol. That's your stop work trigger right there. Marisol's jaw set. I'm HR. I can escalate. I can't physically command operations. Then escalate now. Marisol raised her radio and called Site Director Operations Control, voice calm and formal, the language of institutional alarm. Potential procedural deviation in Bay 3 pressure gate. Request immediate engineering hold review. She listened, nodded once, and said, acknowledged. But the acknowledgement had no urgency in it. Cindy recognized that tone too. Message received into queue. Cindy walked to the personnel gate, badge still active for egress, and signed out under disciplinary hold status while forklifts moved in synchronized loops toward dock staging. She stood just outside the chain-link fence in the employee lot, hard hat under one arm, and watched the bay's high windows. Every few seconds her phone vibrated. Noel. They're running fill with Evan at panel. Luis. No replacement card yet. Priya. Traveler marked dock pending per ops code. The updates came like instrument pulses, each one confirming the same thing. The operation had crossed from argument into action. Another text from Noel arrived while she was still at the fence line. Interlock alarm muted. Red still on. Derek says, proceed low pressure circulation only. Low pressure circulation only was how unsafe sequences got named when people needed to pretend nothing critical had started. Cindy wrote back, any pressurization for proof without valid trace is invalid. Do not sign. She knew Noel was not the signatory, but she also knew messages traveled in a bay faster than memos. She got into her truck, set her notebook on the passenger seat, and did not start the engine. Through the windshield, she could see outbound lane activity increasing. Dunnage strapped. Weather wrap rolled tight around the skid frame. Her phone lit with Evan's name. His voice shook but stayed quiet, as if he were speaking from behind stacked crates. They did a hold at 1200 psi, he said. No channel 3 trend. Derek told me to record plateau manually and backfill with instrument drift noted. He signed as ops witness. Did you sign hydro complete? No. He took the traveler out of my hand and said he'd handle closeout. Email that sentence right now to yourself and to me, Cindy said, word for word. I can get fired. You're already in the line of fire if your name appears on a false record. Silence, then a tight breath. I'll send it. The thread did not stop once she left the lot. It followed her through traffic lights, through her driveway, through a shower she barely remembered taking. Auto replies from compliance stacked beside human fragments from the floor. Unit wrapped, unit moved, unit queued for outbound handling. No one in authority sent a stop order. No one called to challenge her evidence packet on technical grounds. The only motion came from logistics. When the first external signal finally hit the compliance distribution and rolled through a forwarding chain into her archive, it landed with the cold clarity of a stamped docket. Non-conformance notice from customer incoming inspection. Pressure cap serials and crate did not match submitted test package. Request full hydro trace, calibration cert chain, and witness signatures within 24 hours. Cindy read the notice twice, then sent her entire discrepancy bundle directly to the listed inspector contact, Lena Ortiz, with one line in the body. These records were logged before shipment release. Advise immediate commissioning hold pending independent hydro retest. Lena responded in 11 minutes. Received. Escalating to site QA and commissioning lead. That was the first time since Bay 3 that Cindy felt a lever move instead of slip. Her phone rang again with Lena's number, wind noise pushing through the speaker under the voice. "We've got your unit on Deck C at North Channel Energy Terminal. Commissioning is pushing to run because Marine crew window closes tonight. Vendor package is inconsistent. Can you join a live review in 10 minutes? Cindy was already grabbing her laptop. "Send link." The video feed opened to gray sky, steel grating, and the shipped skid bolted into temporary supports. Salt haze moved across the frame in thin sheets. Someone had peeled back insulation around the discharge manifold, and even through compression artifacts, she could see the same geometry she had flagged in Bay 3. Not a different unit. Not a clerical mix-up. The same hardware. A man in a white hard hat introduced himself as Site Commissioning Supervisor Hal Brenner. His tone was businesslike, impatient. "We're at pressure test stage. Vendor claims hydro completed at origin with minor instrument annotation." "We can't burn another mobilization day," Lena cut in. "Origin records are contested and possibly falsified." Hal looked at the camera, then at a paper packet in his hand. "Ms. Chambers, you're not on our payroll. Are you certifying this is unsafe?" Cindy answered with the same precision she had used in Bay 3. "I am certifying that Origin Hydro was not valid. Channel 3 trace unavailable. Interlock remained active. Open weld discontinuity and closure torque discrepancies were unresolved when shipment left. Under those conditions, first full pressure event is uncontrolled proof." Hal's mouth tightened. "Our vendor liaison says the weld indication was cosmetic. A crescent toe indication with subsurface UT response is not cosmetic. It is a crack path until proven otherwise." Another voice came over deck radio, younger, hurried. "Crew is lined and gauges are in. If we wait, we lose the crane team after 1400. There it was again, in a different zip code and a different set of hard hats. Schedule language trying to outrank mechanics. Lena said, "I recommend formal hold." Hal hesitated for a beat that felt longer than it was, then made the call Cindy had feared since Bay 3. "Proceed controlled ramp. Keep exclusion perimeter. We stop on abnormal vibration or audible leak." Cindy leaned toward the camera. "You won't get a polite leak if preload is compromised. Stop now and retest with verified instrumentation." Hal was already turning away. "Begin pressurization." Dread changed shape at that point. In the plant, it had been heavy and slow, a pressure building behind procedure. On the deck, it became a countdown. Cindy watched through a slightly lagged feed as two commissioning technicians, both outside the marked yellow arc, signaled thumbs up to the pump operator. The first rise was ordinary. Gauge needles lifting, frame settling into load, hoses stiffening in smooth arcs. "Pressure passing 1,000, a tech called out. The wind microphone carried a thin background whine, easy to dismiss as pump harmonics. Cindy heard it and felt her shoulders lock. "Zoom manifold toe," she said into the call. "Right side of discharge cluster M17 area." The camera operator panned late, then found it. The weld toe sat in frame, dull metal under overcast light. No obvious opening visible at that magnification. The whine grew a fraction sharper. 2,000 psi, someone called. Cindy spoke faster. "That frequency shift is boundary excitation. Stop at once and depressurize." Hal answered without looking at camera. "Continue, we're stable." At 3,000, vibration became visible in the support frame as a fine tremor, not dramatic, just enough to blur the edge of a tag plate. One technician stepped back involuntarily and then reset his stance. embarrassed at being seen retreating. Cindy pressed both palms to her desk as if force could travel through fiber optic cable. 4,000. Lena's voice cut through. Hal, I'm entering stop recommendation in the log. Logged, he said. Proceed. At 5,000 psi, the whine turned needle-thin and continuous, a sound like metal singing through clenched teeth. Cindy did not need better speakers to identify it. Crack faces rubbing under load produced that tone right before separation accelerated. Stop now, she said. Now. No one moved for 2 beats. Then the frame jolted once. Not a collapse, a pulse. Gauges quivered. 5,800 and climbing, a deck tech shouted, voice cracking. Hold, Hal said. But the command came late and traveled slower than strain energy. 6,000 psi, another tech called, almost on top of the first. At that gauge call, right at 6,000 pounds per square inch, the manifold tow line opened in a sudden bright seam that ran faster than the eye could track, the crack unzipping along the weld path and around the branch intersection. A closure on the discharge side tore free from lost preload and launched across the grating with brutal speed, spinning end over end like a steel blade before slamming into a cable tray stanchion and shearing it flat. A white jet punched sideways from the opening, atomized fluid blasting into mist, and the concussion hit a fraction after the visual break, a hard percussion wave that overloaded the call audio into static. The camera dropped, skidded, and pointed at deck plating while alarms erupted in overlapping tones. Cindy heard shouting through clipped packets. Man down, man down. Kill the pump. Medical to deck C. She was already on her feet, headset cord taut, heart hammering so hard she felt it in her throat. The feed recovered to a tilted view. 2 technicians were on the deck inside the perimeter, moving but down, one clutching his leg above the ankle, the other rolling to hands and knees with both palms over his ears. Spray drifted in a white cloud around the skid. Insulation hung in torn strips from the manifold rack, fluttering in the wind. Steel fragments had peppered the nearby guard mesh and embedded in soft cladding panels 15 feet away. No fire followed, only alarms, shouted coordinates, and the hiss of residual discharge bleeding down. Lena's voice came back first, controlled through strain. Emergency response en route. Area isolated, pressure at 0. Hal did not speak for several seconds. When he finally did, confidence was gone, replaced by the flat tone of someone watching consequences become record. Preserve scene. Nobody touches the unit. Secure all documents. Cindy took one long breath and forced her own voice steady. Lena, save this call recording, raw feed and deck log. Chain of custody starts now. Also, lock vendor packet revisions. No one edits timestamps. Already doing it, Lena said. Sirens rose in the background closer each second, and the camera caught responders entering frame with a stretcher and hearing protection kits. Cindy stood at her desk, one hand gripping the chair back so hard her knuckles blanched, and watched the exact failure chain she had written in Bay 3 unfold in less than 10 seconds on another company's deck. Derek had called hydro paperwork with water in a pipe. Reality had answered at 6,000 pounds per square inch with steel in flight, injured workers, and a scene tape line where a shipping milestone was supposed to be. On deck C, the alarms kept cycling in overlapping patterns, and the first clean command that cut through the noise came from Lena, not Hal. Freeze the scene, photos before touch. Log every person who crosses the tape. Her voice carried over wind and siren rise, and the camera shook as she moved toward the manifold skid with a tablet held against her chest. Cindy stayed on the call, head set tight, watching responders kneel beside the two downed technicians. One man gripped the stretcher rails while a medic immobilized his lower leg. The other sat upright with his back to a cable rack, eyes squeezed shut, both palms still cupped over his ears, while a responder checked pupil response and asked orientation questions twice. Hal finally re-entered frame and spoke as if each word had to pass through resistance. "Ms. Chambers, confirm what you want preserved." Cindy answered without softening anything. "Do not move the failed closure. Do not cut out the weld section yet. Tag and bag every fragment with location markers. Secure the pressure logs from pump controller, analog gauge photos at failure point, and raw call recording. Lock the vendor packet and access history. If anyone says clean copy, stop them." Lena nodded and repeated the instructions into her own radio, so they existed on two independent channels. Evidence preservation order issued at 1422. No edits, no substitutions, no disposal. The responders lifted the injured leg fracture technician onto the stretcher and moved him toward the stairwell enclosure. The second technician stood with support, unsteady but ambulatory, and flinched hard when a nearby alarm chirp changed tone. Cindy caught that flinch and filed it with the rest. Hearing injuries rarely looked dramatic in the first 10 minutes. They showed up later in audiology reports and compensation claims, in people asking co-workers to repeat simple sentences because a pressure wave had rewritten their normal. At 14:30, after emergency transport cleared the deck, Lena shifted the call from open video to formal incident bridge, and the participant list doubled in under a minute. Customer legal, customer QA, site EHS, commissioning controls, insurer hotline representative, and vendor liaison all joined with the same strained politeness people used when they already knew the day had crossed from operations into liability. Derek was not on the bridge. The vendor liaison, a contracts manager named Paul Grady, spoke first for the shipper and tried to reclaim procedural ground. "We need to avoid premature conclusions. The package indicates hydro completion and origin with minor instrument notation." Cindy leaned toward her mic. "The package is internally inconsistent. Channel 3 trace was unavailable. Interlock remained active. Hold point was not legitimately closed." Paul replied in a practiced tone. "You are a former employee currently under disciplinary removal, correct?" Lena cut in before Cindy had to. "Her pre-shipment records match what we just saw fail. Challenge the facts, not her job status." That line changed the center of gravity. Site EHS requested immediate transmittal of Cindy's discrepancy archive. Customer legal asked for original metadata, not forwarded copies. Cindy exported everything from her case folder, including raw photos, recorder test video, tamper seal image, maintenance ticket from Luis, and the time-stamped refusal email subject line that had started the paper trail. Hold point refusal, skid 2 4-117A. She sent the package with checksum hashes in the body and read the hash strings aloud, while legal repeated them for record. Process discipline under pressure looked cold from the outside, but cold was what kept evidence admissible. By 15:05, the first numeric estimate landed. Customer controls reported damage to the skid itself as total constructive loss, pending engineering autopsy. Cable tray sections and local instrument runs on Deck C required replacement. 2 neighboring modules were tagged contaminated by hydraulic fluid aerosol deposition, and had to be isolated for cleanup. Crane remobilization and specialist crew rebooking charges started accruing by the hour. Hal, voice flatter now, stated what no one wanted to say out loud in the first call. We have a minimum 27-day commissioning impact if replacement manifold fabrication starts immediately. Cindy heard paper shuffling on the bridge. Then the insurer representative asked the question that always arrived once emergency response stabilized. Please identify whether required pre-delivery hydrostatic proof test was completed per contract and code. No one from the vendor side answered for 3 long seconds. Cindy did. No valid hydro proof occurred at origin. I documented refusal to release without it. The insurer rep asked for documentary support. She already had it in his inbox. At 16:12, Lena called Cindy directly, off the large bridge, and her voice dropped from command cadence into exhausted precision. Hospital confirmed 1 severe tibia fibula fracture. Surgical stabilization planned tonight. Second tech diagnosed acute acoustic trauma and vestibular disturbance. Both are stable. Families notified. She paused, then added, no fatalities. Cindy closed her eyes for one breath, the first complete breath she had taken since 6,000 psi flashed across the deck gauge. Thank you for calling me with the real numbers. I'm calling because your warning was specific, Lena said, and because people are already trying to relabel this as unforeseen equipment behavior. It was entirely foreseeable, Cindy said. That's why the hold point existed. By early evening, the same facts that had been ignored as production friction became mandatory language in institutional reporting. The customer issued a Level 1 nonconformance escalation, not for a single defect, but for suspected record integrity breach. Incoming inspection quarantined every remaining crate from Derek's plant lot code. Commissioning issued a stop work on all pressure introduction activities linked to that vendor until independent verification. None of it was loud, but each action tightened the noose in a way shouting never could. At 1840, Marisol from HR finally called Cindy back. Shop noise leaked through the line behind her, and she sounded like she was reading while walking. I need your statement for internal incident review. Operations maintains shipment release, followed approved override pathway. Cindy answered evenly. There is no approved override pathway for falsifying hydro completion. Send me the exact policy reference and revision number if they're claiming one. Marisol went quiet, then said, Understood. Can you resend your timeline? It's already in your inbox from 8/11, 8/19, and 14/26 with attachments. I see it now, Marisol said, and the phrase carried a different weight than polite acknowledgement. She saw it now because external injury made it expensive not to. 3 days passed before the insurance posture hardened into writing. The reservation of rights letter arrived first, cautious and conditional. 48 hours later, it became full claim denial for the shipped skid event and related deck damage, citing material misrepresentation in test certification, invalid calibration chain, and evidence of bypass attempt at safety interlock. Customer legal forwarded Cindy a redacted copy because her archive had become central to causation. The key sentence was blunt. Coverage void where mandatory proof testing was not performed and records were falsified to indicate completion. Financial accounting followed, dry and brutal. Initial damage and delay ledger reached $11.8 million. Equipment replacement, deck repairs, specialist labor remobilization, schedule penalties, environmental cleanup contractors, and medical cost reserves. Hal sent the figure on a late-night bridge with no commentary, then moved to the next agenda item like reading weather. Cindy wrote it in her notebook anyway, because numbers were the moral language executives understood when they had ignored every other language first. The regulatory side arrived as a slow hammer, exactly as she had predicted in Bay 3. State safety investigators served document preservation notices to both companies. They requested traveler revision history, badge access logs at the test panel, maintenance records for recorder channel cards, calibration cert validity windows, and all internal communications containing the phrase documentation pending for the quarter. They subpoenaed metadata, not PDFs. They interviewed Luis, Priya, Noel, Evan, Marisol, and eventually Cindy in a recorded session that lasted 2 hours and never once asked her about attitude, only mechanism and sequence. In that interview room, she laid out the chain in plain causality. When recorder channel 3 failed, Hydrotrace became invalid. When the interlock stayed active, test authorization was correctly blocked. When operations pushed release anyway, they transferred first true pressure proof to customer commissioning. The weld discontinuity and preload uncertainty were unresolved. Pressurization then produced boundary failure at operating load. That sequence was preventable at 4 separate gates. The lead investigator, a former millwright with a regulator badge, nodded once and said, "This is the clearest failure chain we've heard this quarter." External contacts resolved one by one. Luis's maintenance ticket confirmed no spare card existed before shipment and logged instrument unavailable for proof test in his own words. Priya produced system logs showing traveler status toggled through documentation pending under Operations Authority Code, then backdated close-out entries after truck departure. Evan surrendered his email to himself and Cindy, time-stamped minutes after Derek's instruction. Quoting exactly, he'd handle close-out. Noel provided photos from the bay floor of red interlock still lit, while transit braces were installed. Each piece was small in isolation. Together they formed structural truth. By the second week after the blast, delayed consequences hit beyond the single incident file. 2 additional customers issued records requests on skids delivered during Derek's bonus window. 1 froze payment on outstanding invoices pending independent retest witness. Another suspended new purchase orders entirely. The reputational damage did not explode. It bled in controlled, measurable losses that finance could not spin as a one-off anomaly. The board noticed when cash forecasts shifted. Internal corporate response changed tone the day the ASME quality stamp suspension notice arrived pending corrective action and third-party audit. Without that stamp, shipping pressure equipment at scale became a legal and commercial maze. Emergency executive meetings replaced production huddles. Consultants appeared. Outside counsel took over conference rooms and asked for the same evidence Cindy had already sent, except now invoices accompanied every question. Marisol called again that Friday, no noise behind her this time. "Your disciplinary hold has been reversed pending final findings. You're on paid administrative status through review." Cindy said, "I want that in writing." "It's in your email." She checked. It was. The final immediate reckoning meeting happened on a secure video line with customer legal, insurer counsel, state investigators observing, and vendor executive leadership, trying to salvage credibility with formal language and late humility. Derek attended for 12 minutes before his counsel asked for recess. In those 12 minutes, he attempted one last simplification. We had minor paperwork lag under shipping pressure. No one intended harm. Cindy answered when asked for rebuttal, and she kept it to mechanics. This was not paperwork lag. This was a skipped hydro, a known instrument failure, unresolved physical defects, and a directed release against active interlock. Intent is not required for consequence. Pressure does the math anyway. No one challenged that statement on technical grounds. When the call closed, Lena remained on a separate line with Cindy for another minute. Wind noise was gone. She sounded like she was in an office with the door shut. For what it's worth, both injured technicians are expected to recover. Long rehab for the fracture. Audiology follow-up, ongoing. Cindy looked at her notebook, at the page where she had written, "Do not pressurize" in block letters hours before the blast. "I'm glad they're alive." "So am I," Lena said. "And we're rebuilding our acceptance gate to require live validation of origin test files, not just packet signatures." That was the rational center of the wreckage. Systems learning because people paid first. Cindy did not celebrate it. She recorded it because the record was how prevention survived memory. That night she sat at her kitchen table with 3 folders open, medical updates, financial ledger extracts, and legal notices, and arranged them in sequence the same way she had arranged defects at the panel: evidence, threshold, outcome. 1 severe leg fracture, multiple hearing injuries, 27-day shutdown, $11.8 million and climbing, insurance denial, regulatory investigation, client freezes. Every number traced back to one managerial doctrine Derek had tried to enforce in Bay 3, ship date over test gate. It had sounded efficient in a morning meeting. By the end of the second week, it looked like what it had always been. Deferred detonation, billed to someone else's deck until the bill came home. That night she sat at her kitchen table with 3 folders open: medical updates, financial ledger extracts, and legal notices, and arranged them in sequence the same way she had arranged defects at the panel: evidence, threshold, outcome. At 7:10 the next morning, she carried a hard case into Conference Room B at the State Investigator Field Office, where the air smelled like burnt coffee and copier heat, and she set every physical item on a gray felt mat while a recorder captured chain of custody language word for word. Item 1, bound notebook, original entries from 6/42 through incident day. Item 2, encrypted drive with raw photos and metadata. Item 3, print discrepancy reports with distribution headers. She watched the investigator photograph each object, apply tamper tape, and sign the transfer log. When he reached the image set of the split bypass seal, he paused and angled the screen toward his partner. "Seal number fragment matches lock set serial family on Bay 3 panel," he said. "Not random handling damage." Cindy did not add commentary. She only slid forward the maintenance ticket from Luis and the still image of Channel 3 flatlined under injected signal. The investigator wrote in black block letters, "Pre-ship instrument unavailable for proof test. Independently corroborated." At 9:35, the corporate board hearing opened in the plant's training auditorium with cameras mounted for official record, fluorescent light too bright for anyone to hide in, and every chair filled by legal compliance, finance, and department leads, pretending this was just governance routine. Derek sat at the respondent table in a navy suit instead of a hard hat, jaw set in the same angle he wore on the bay floor, but his hands kept flattening and refolding the edge of a legal pad. Cindy sat 3 rows back until called, beside Marisol, who whispered without looking at her, "I should have escalated harder at 811. Cindy answered quietly, "You logged it. That log mattered." Priya testified first. She read from system logs projected on a screen. Traveler status toggled from active hold point to documentation pending under Operations Authority, then edited after outbound gate timestamp. Counsel asked, "Who instructed that status pathway?" Priya swallowed once and said, "Derek Voss." Verbatim, he said, "Close it now and we'll align signatures after truck out." The room stayed silent long enough for keyboard clicks to sound like hail. Evan testified next, pale but steady. He confirmed he had no solo witness authority and had refused to sign Hydro Complete. On the display behind him, Legal pulled up his email sent from the bay. He took the Traveler out of my hand and said he'd handle closeout. Noel followed and confirmed the red interlock remained lit, while transit braces were installed. Luis confirmed no replacement recorder card existed before shipment and identified the burned channel card corner in his maintenance photo. Each witness added 1 bolt to the same flange until no narrative gap remained. At 10:48, compliance called Cindy to the table. She sat, adjusted the microphone once, and answered questions with the same cadence she used in live testing. No drama, no performance, just sequence and mechanism. "Did you refuse assignment?" "I refused to certify a false hydro." "Did you notify internal controls?" "Engineering, compliance, EHS, and HR with timestamps and attachments." "Did anyone rebut your technical findings before shipment?" "No one rebutted on mechanism. They redirected to schedule." Outside counsel for the company tried a final dilution strategy. Could this have been an unforeseeable field anomaly? Cindy looked directly at the board and answered, "No. The failure mode was identified before release: weld discontinuity, preload uncertainty, invalid test record, active interlock fault. Field conditions triggered what origin controls were designed to prevent." Counsel asked, "So your position is absolute?" "My position is procedural. Pressure boundaries are not opinion-driven." The chair, a retired operations executive with a gravel voice, leaned into his mic. "Ms. Chambers, if the hold point had been respected, would Deck C event have occurred that day?" Cindy said, "No." He nodded once and wrote something longhand before passing the page to board counsel. The hearing recessed for 20 minutes, then resumed with finance and audit, presenting the delayed systemic damage Derek had once dismissed as admin friction. A controller read from a slide without inflection. "Insurance claim denied due to material misrepresentation in test certification. 3 clients froze purchase orders. 2 required independent retest of recent deliveries at vendor cost. ASME quality stamp suspended pending corrective action and third-party verification." Another slide showed bonus records. Derek's quarter-end shipment incentive tied directly to units booked before month close, including 24-117A. Counsel asked him, "Did you disclose this incentive when directing hold point closure?" Derek stared at the table and said, "Compensation is standard policy." Counsel repeated sharper, "Did you disclose conflict while issuing override instruction?" "No." Then came badge access logs, projected in enlarged timestamp columns. Bay 3 panel access at 7:49 by Derek's credentials. tamper seal break window matched. Derek's attorney objected to characterization. The board overruled. The chair spoke plainly. You called a certified technician obsolete, removed her from duty, reassigned authority to an unqualified junior, directed documentation closure before valid hydro, and shipped a pressure unit that failed at customer operating pressure. Is any part of that statement materially false? Derek's voice dropped almost to a whisper. We were trying to meet shipment. The chair answered. You met shipment. You did not meet duty. At 12:22, the board returned from closed session, cameras still running, and delivered action in language that left no room for reinterpretation. Derek Voss is terminated for cause effective immediately. All quarter-end incentive compensation subject to full clawback. Findings referred to state authorities for records falsification and reckless endangerment review. Corporate self-report to code certification body shall include acknowledgement of willful gate bypass. Security did not touch Derek. They did not need to. He stood, gathered nothing, and walked out through the side aisle while the room stayed seated. The same floor he had used for public humiliation now watched him leave in administrative silence. Marisol exhaled through her nose and closed her folder. Priya stared at her tablet until the screen dimmed. Evan looked down at his hands, and then finally at Cindy. And in that look was the answer to the one reaction that had hung since Bay 3. He had known it was wrong when he was handed the pen, and he had chosen not to sign. By 14:05, state investigators executed the next step in open daylight. In a smaller conference room off legal, they served Derek with notice of charges filed. Records falsification and reckless endangerment tied to documented override actions and altered certification flow. He signed acknowledgement beside counsel and said nothing. At the same hour, customer legal sent written closure on every external contact Cindy had initiated. Nonconformance accepted as substantiated, call recordings and deck logs preserved under legal hold, and all requested archives received with verified checksums. Lena called at 14:40 from a quiet hospital corridor and gave the medical callback Cindy had been waiting for. Surgery on the fracture went well. Audiology confirms significant temporary threshold shift in the second tech, with a rehab plan active. Both asked me to tell you they read your original warning. Cindy sat in her parked truck outside the plant and pressed her thumb against the steering wheel seam until the plastic creaked. Tell them I'm sorry they paid for someone else's shortcut. Lena answered. They said the same thing about you, but with a different ending. They said your record is why this didn't get buried. At 1600, she walked back through the same personnel gate she had exited under disciplinary hold, and the guard scanned a reinstated badge that now carried expanded authority. In HR, Marisol handed her a printed letter with 3 signatures. Full reinstatement back pay, disciplinary file voided, and appointment as interim pressure test gate lead. Cindy read every line before signing receipt. Scope? She asked. Marisol slid over a second packet. You design and implement corrective program plant-wide. Mandatory live interlock validation, independent witness credentials, immutable trace capture, seal control inventory, and outbound serial reconciliation. Board wants your training module delivered to every supervisor. Cindy flipped pages until she found the section on physical evidence disposition. Every item she had collected was listed with final status. Notebook entered into regulatory archive and digitized. Encrypted drive mirrored to legal evidence vault. burned channel card retained for forensic lab, out-of-service sling tag tied to lot audit that removed 23 expired slings from the blue rack, traveler revision history locked read only, UT and penetrant files attached to corrective action report. Nothing missing, nothing lost. At 1720, she stood in Bay 3 with a dozen supervisors and techs around the same test panel, now fitted with dual-seal interlock covers and a live display that showed recorder channel health before any pressure sequence could arm. She did not raise her voice. She placed a laminated card on the cart and read it once. No hydro, no ship. If channel is dead, test is dead. If hold point is open, gate is closed. If someone asks you to backfill a pressure record, you stop and call compliance from the panel. She handed the card to Evan. You run the first drill. He followed sequence by the book, called out each verification, and stopped when she inserted a simulated channel fault. Interlock active, authorization denied, he said, then looked up. Request maintenance, log timestamp, no bypass. Cindy nodded. That is the whole job. As shift light faded to amber through the high windows, she took one last walk past the manifold stand where M17 had first bled a crescent line under developer, and she stopped at the board where monthly metrics were posted. Someone had added a new line under shipment count and scrap rate. Verified hydro compliance, 100% this week. It was not triumph. It was baseline restored. She signed the daily gate log, closed the binder, and left it on the cart in plain view. Derek had saved one ship date and lost his bonus, his title, and his career on camera. Cindy had refused one signature and kept a failure chain from being rewritten as bad luck. In her world, that was the only verdict that mattered. Pressure did not care about hierarchy, and safety rules were written in blood long before any quarter-end forecast.